Hey everybody, it's Dr. Lucien again, and this is lecture 20. I'm kind of pushing together multiple things I've been working on, but I'm going to try to give you as much real world experience as possible with this one, but I'm going to try to go rapid fire. So I didn't provide you with a video at the beginning. I don't know if you guys even like doing that or not. So it's difficult to get information regarding bloodborne pathogens and heat stress. I mean, the information is kind of sparse, so I'm really just going to focus on what it is. So bloodborne pathogens is 1910-1030. That's the standard. It's under the subpart Z, which is at the end, but it's just one particular standard. Heat stress is a proposed standard, so it's not a real standard yet. Right now they cite it under the general duty clause, and they use AGCIH as a guide, and then medical services and first aid is under 1910-151. You also find the eye wash or emergency eye wash and emergency shower under that same 1910-151. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that. There is an ANSI standard that they update from time to time with what should be in a first aid kit, and we'll take a look at some of those classes and types. And then ASSP recently worked with ANSI to develop a standard for heat stress management in construction and demolition operations. This is the bloodborne pathogens and needle stick prevention on the OSHA website. It's primarily geared to healthcare facilities, clinics, laboratories, things like that. CDC has estimated that there are about 18 million people in the healthcare industry. Their primary cause of injury is ergonomic in nature, then slip, trips, and falls, and then sharps. As far as controlling it, you practice universal precautions. You don't you properly dispose of anything that is touched, blood or bodily fluids. You wear your PPE, you wear it properly, you use the proper bloodborne pathogen bag, things like that. Here's a basic list from ANSI for their Class A. You have to pay for their standard, but when you look online, you can usually find it. My recommendation is hire a company who will come in and stock it for you. Better yet, they will let you know what items have been taken by workers. So there's a Class B kit, and then there's the Type 1 through 4 first aid kits. You choose by what you do. If your workers are exposed to laceration hazards, they're working with like sharp metals or wood that can splinter, you should have a higher class of first aid kit, and probably have people on site who are trained to stop blood and know how to clean it up and how to properly bag things. Okay, if it's just sort of an office setting, you can get away with a Class B and it's not a big deal. Some places ask, can you provide medication, whether it is like an antihistamine or pain medication. The experts say no, because if it's misused, you can be blamed for it. What I did at my plant is I provided it to people who, like the time desk lady, and if people really needed it, they could go ask, and then she would disperse it. So it wasn't actively just provided for everyone, but people could still have access to it. So it was controlled. One thing to think about is infection control, and this came out of the whole COVID thing. What we can do if we know that there is either a bloodborne disease or another type of infectious disease, what can we do? And it's really, you have to know what it is first, but ultimately, as long as you practice universal precautions, basically all blood and bodily fluid is infected, and if you treat it as such and never allow yourselves to be exposed to it, never enter one of your ports of your body, then you're right. Now, the most difficult one is obviously respiratory. But if you wear a mask and you try to contain the aerosols that could be dispersed that are infected, well, then you're taking care of it. My biggest issue is this little picture down here. You guys, in class, I'll stop lectures sometimes and I'll remind students, stop putting your fingers in your damn mouths. This is how disease is primarily transmitted. I had a girl who just graduated. Her fingernails were just like bitten past the whites of the beds. She said she was nervous or whatever. I'm like, everything you've touched since the last time you washed your hand is now going into your mouth. So don't put your fingers in your mouth. The only time you should ever put a finger in your mouth is right after you had washed it properly. Yeah, that freaks me out every year. I mean, why does disease spread so readily, like on a college campus? Too many people are putting their fingers in their mouths, or they're not practicing good personal hygiene with hand washing. Yeah. Though you think more of food stuff, but there's the correct way to put on and take off PPE to mitigate whether you get exposed. So like the degloving process, these are all things that really I think were discussed ad nauseum during the pandemic. I talked about universal precautions. Treat all blood and bodily fluid as infected and you should be okay. You should know how to wash your hands by now. Keep your fingers out of your mouth. Use barrier protection, wear gloves, wear a face mask and gown, use caution, discard contaminated materials, clean the area properly with a disinfectant, which is either listed as a disinfectant or a 10-to-1 ratio of water to bleach is also a good disinfectant. Wash your hands thoroughly for at least 20 seconds. Wash clothing with hot water. So bloodborne pathogens, first aid, heat stress, none of them fall under the most frequently cited standards. But when we narrow it down a little bit, yeah, indeed, bloodborne has been cited over 100 times. And, we had talked about that primarily in healthcare. You can see they have the lion's share. Secondarily would be food service. I think that's kind of interesting. As far as the first aid medical services standard, it's the manufacturing, transportation, a little bit of service. Interesting that we don't see... Well, no, it's not actually interesting. Healthcare facilities, they have this in spades. So, as far as assessment methods, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You might want to adopt the epidemiological model, but that's the exposure model. You can either do a fault tree analysis, you can do a barrier analysis, or you can just do a visual audit and checklist. The big thing is, being aware, practicing it. One thing, when I was a compliance officer, and I still do it now, whenever I go into a lab in a clinic where they take samples of blood and bodily fluid and test it, and sometimes they'll store it, like the samples or medications, in a small refrigerator, I always look in there because unequivocally people have food in there. Let me repeat that. People put food in the same refrigerator where there is blood, urine, and stool samples and weird medications. Not smart, you guys. And I know nurses get upset because, why can't we have coffee at our nursing station? Because you just came out of a room and you were touching other people and their waste and their blood, and you still have your gloves on, and now you grab your mug and you grab the coffee, the pot, and now it's contaminated. And now the next person who walks up who is not wearing gloves is going to get on their hands. And then they're going to put their fingers in their mouth, and then they're going to be exposed to whatever was there. Yeah. Treat them like children sometimes. All right, so we're going to shift gears here and go to heat stress. Although I've got some additional presentations to bring up here. It's interesting that, why would we have to worry about this as far north as Wisconsin and Minnesota? It's because we have extremes, and those extremes change rapidly. One of the best ways to deal with heat stress is become acclimated to it. And people down south are acclimated to it. They don't get exposed to negative 50 degree temperatures, wind chills in the winter, and then have to deal with 100 degrees or 100 plus heat index in the summer a month later. And it's those rapid and variable changes in environmental temperature and conditions that they don't allow our bodies to adjust. So once our bodies are acclimated, usually we can get by pretty well. We know we need to drink more water, maybe eat less, wear the right clothing, so on and so forth. When the conditions change rapidly and we're not used to it, our bodies are more susceptible to incurring heat illness. Okay, and it talks about it right here. Probably already read it. There are guidelines, and that's kind of what I want to get into when we get to the presentation. Is OSHA is proposing a standard, and that standard sets kind of conditions. When you have these conditions, you shall do this. But heat stress is a little more complex than that because it's what the person does. It's how acclimated they are to their work environment, how their body can adjust. Can it regulate heat given that it's generating its own heat, the environmental heat, the clothing they're wearing, whether they're working in the sun, whether there's any airflow, all these things come into play. So the most basic is heat rash. That's just a dermal reaction, typically due to sweat and other contaminants getting into our sweat glands. Heat cramps is when muscles cramp because there is more than likely a electrolyte imbalance due to sweat. Heat exhaustion, your body's not reacting very well to the environment. It's not really it's not finding a good way to regulate itself. Heat stroke is when things are really bad. That's where your body is actually shutting itself down to try to cope with the heat. How do you prevent it? Keeping hydrated and keeping good electrolytes are very important. Getting plenty of rest. So if you go out, drinking the night before and come in hungover and dehydrated, you're more susceptible. Good night's sleep, good diet, good physical condition, acclimation, all very good things. And still, you may have to, take a break in a cool area or, provide airflow to cool yourself. But if it's too humid, then you don't get that cooling effect. So what you need to do is you need to adopt a standard by which you're going to allow workers to take breaks or make sure they're consuming the right amount of water or electrolytic drinks. So let's get to. I was going to provide other videos. I am not now. I'm going to very quickly just shift gears to this was the old program, and I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. This was created out of the Susan Harwood grant. For most employers, you just really need to assess what is the potential level for there being a laceration or the production of blood or bodily fluid, and if it's very common, or if you have a worker population, or if they're working with servicing patients that may have hepatitis B or HIV or what are the other ones? TB, tuberculosis. Then they need to be trained on it. So you can look under 1030. HIV and hepatitis B, just really try to make sure that nobody gets exposed to blood or bodily fluids. But this is more along the lines of patient care, labs, environmental services, waste management, laundry too. If there's possible blood or bodily fluids or needles in the laundry, food service possibly, but that's more hepatitis A or other viral or parasitic agents. But you're usually the one preparing the food. So you need to determine what the exposure might be and then just create a plan for workers to control it. That's really what it comes down to. They need to know what universal precautions are. You just assume all blood or bodily fluids contain it, and so you never allow yourself to be exposed to it. If you're going to be working with sharps, you should know how to properly work with them. You never recap a syringe, and you dispose of it in its proper receptacle. Good hand hygiene is really important. Don't put your fingers in your mouth. You should know how to use, clean, store, inspect the PPE that's provided. Housekeeping is meant to try to keep the environmental levels down. Need to properly dispose of regulated waste. Typically, bloodborne waste is incinerated to kill everything off. And it costs more to have it hauled away too, just so you know. Sharps, you make sure they're in a container they can't poke through. Never reach your hand into a sharps container, and make sure it's emptied on a regular basis so it doesn't get so full that needles are sticking out. Once worked on a case where a garbage handler was picked up a plastic bag and a needle stuck through and injected a fluid into him. He's pretty scared. Ended up, it was just insulin, and so he reacted mildly, but never incurred a disease. But it was scary because you don't know whose needle it is, and they're not supposed to handle trash bags that way. A lot of trash collection now is done completely by a robot arm, which is good. So there is no chance of that happening. If a person is needle sick, it goes through a whole process. You have to record it. They may have to take some prophylaxis depending on what the potential might be. But for the most part, you want to just avoid people getting stuck. It doesn't happen as much as it used to, which is good. And you can get the vaccines for hepatitis B if you are in an occupation that could be exposed to it. And then it's got the post-evaluation and counseling and all that other stuff. It's not a very common thing, as much as it used to be. Make sure workers are trained, they know how to read the labels, the warning labels, and the signage, and give them a chance to ask questions and record keeping. Yeah, that's about it for bloodborne. Really, if you're going to work in a hospital or a clinic setting, you're going to need to know a lot more than what I just covered. But for the most part, you should have people designated to respond in your plant, and they should go through probably a Red Cross training. I know I had worked with our provider for our first aid kits in our plant, and they were setting that up for me. So it's very easy to do, you guys. All right, this is something I guess I had put together. I just found it. I'm like, who put this together? It's really good. Oh, I did. So this is OSHA's proposed heat standard. They have some triggers. They tend to go by the wet bulb globe temperature. That's what WBGT. You need a special piece of equipment to measure that. It measures dry bulb, wet bulb, and then globe temperature, which is radiant heat. And it determines sort of a heat index. What we did is that we tied together the different graphs of the wet bulb globe temperature with heat index, which is just humidity and temperature. And we used heat index because then we didn't need a special piece of equipment. And we actually, I'll show you here in a little bit, we were able to repurpose some commercial thermostats to create a data logging system. High heat triggers, it's a little bit higher, and when that happens, you need to act a little bit different. That's really what it is. And heat index is actually a National Weather Service or NOAA measure, which is why we wanted to use it, whereas wet bulb globe temperature is more of an industrial hygiene concept. They're very similar in nature, except for that radiant heat. And to get special equipment and do special readings where people don't understand, I just don't like that. Some of the other things the standard calls for is site-specific, as it should. It's more of a performance, just like lockout, tagout. And you can see all these things. They do designate a heat coordinator, which I think is a great idea. I really think the record-keeping standard should have a designated record-keeping coordinator. Talks about controls, providing the proper water. Interesting when it reaches a certain trigger, 1 quart per employee per hour. That's quite a bit of water, you guys. It really is. I think we were doing 12 ounces per hour, a bottle of water an hour, and every third bottle we wanted it to be with an electrolyte powder. But the workers could really choose it, and we would walk around with popsicles and make sure the water was ice cold because that provides some internal cooling. We did have an air-conditioned break room. They want you to provide something where people could rest and sort of recover. Increased airflow. Yeah, we had a lot of fans, things like that. Heat shielding would have been nice. We did the best we could. Ambient temperatures greater than 2, and the employer must evaluate humidity and determine if fan use is harmful. That is true. When temps get... I thought it was 115. Maybe I thought it was like 110, 115. It's like you can't cool down. You blow a fan when it's too hot. It's like a convection oven. You're basically heating the person up. And then they built this whole rest work schedule, which I didn't like because it should be performance based. You should be what the employer feels would be best. And I know that there are wearable technologies now that you can monitor an individual's temperature, which is probably a good idea because then in that case, each individual, it can be instantaneously monitored to see how acclimated they are. So I think that's a good idea. And it talks a little bit about PPE there. So let's get to Yeah, you have to have emergency response on what to do. We had that, and we were talking to people. I built the program before this came out, and before we got the sophisticated monitoring system. So I did do training with my workers. I did specialty training with my supervisors. Each one got handouts to keep with them. I put them up on the walls too. Yes, you should definitely do refresher training, maybe even a couple times a season, supplemental training as needed. Training must be in the language of the people, and so I had to provide it both in Spanish and English. Must keep electronic or written records, of course. If you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And then here's the basis for the suggested citation, and just some basic information about when drugs will affect a person's ability to remain cool. Excuse me, I'm like choking here. Yeah. And then here's just some of the wet bulb globe temp information that we found. So there is no really definitive one source. I even went as far as to see what regions or areas may be high or low threat. It's interesting that, down south they're being exposed to higher heat, but they're more acclimated to it. Their bodies can adjust to it. Up north, we're not as able. So this is an example of something that I'd used. It's wet bulb, but what we're trying to do is come up with a more consistent correlation between wet bulb and heat index. And we ended up going with heat index because it was much easier. And so that's that. I've got one more to show you. Actually, no, I've got some really cool programs to show you. So this is something I built. It's the heat stress reduction building ventilation plan. This is an air compressor that was indoors. And I had one of the devices I ordered right away was a velometer to measure airflow, but so I could also measure temperature and humidity with it. And so I was measuring like 130 degrees coming out of this air compressor at about 500 CFN. It wasn't running constantly, but what it was doing is it was increasing the temperature in this corner where workers were right on the other side of this piece of equipment, by 9-10 degrees, depending on the conditions. So I just got a box, taped it to the exhaust, not tight, it's not airtight. And then we had this fan that one of the engineers found for me, and it's a confined space entry fan. And I hooked it all up and I ran this out at some doors, and I was able to then lower the temperature considerably. Yeah, okay, by 3 degrees, it was probably more than that depending on the conditions, but right off the bat, I got cooling. So I addressed what the problem was, what was going on. Prior to me, the company just kind of, once workers started dropping, they would respond. I shouldn't laugh at that, but that's kind of what it was. I was able to place decent size small refrigerators throughout the plant, and then order bottled water by the pallet. And we always made sure we had plenty, and we had people who were stocking it. And I always made sure that we had electrolytes in different flavors. And then up in the break room, the freezers that were there were always stocked with electrolyte popsicles. And then we would do other things too when we could anticipate that the warm weather, when the weather was going to be causing it. So I went through and tracked by zone, and we had some exhaust fans, we had we had movable fans, which would be here. And so what I did is I devised a way to position these depending on conditions, especially in the evening, to try and fix stuff. We also borrowed is it a heat camera or an infrared camera? And we found that the roof units, these two, and the other windows they opened at the top were actually letting heat in and not exhausting heat like we thought. So by closing those during the day, we're actually able to maintain cooler environment, at least in this region here. This suffered from radiant heat. This area here, radiant heat, because it was a lower ceiling. This was a higher ceiling. And each piece of equipment actually gave off heat too. The warehouse itself was usually the coolest area. And what I found is I could use one of these fans right at the top of the ramp right here and blow it down into this area and achieve like a 5 to 6 degree reduction. But it was never, it wouldn't last. It was more of a temporary offset. And so I came up with plans to try that I had tested myself. I would go in at like 7 o'clock at night and stay till 4 in the morning and see how much I could bring down the heat load in the building. And through that, so I created this right here. This is my initial chart when I was doing manual readings, because I ordered a bunch of wall units that had temperature, humidity, and noise level on it. And I'd walk through every hour, every 45 minutes, and I would manually take that stuff. And then what I would do is compare it to outdoor conditions. And then I would start doing, what do you call that? Modeling. Here's some of my stuff here. So I'd take it in different areas, and I could start figuring out that when the forecast was going to be in a certain range of something, we could expect them to be exceeding some of our limits. And this is one of the things we'd use. So it's wet bulb and relative humidity. And I use this to create, and I use this too to create that chart. And then this is just some of the information we provided throughout the plant. Came up with instructions on what to do for supervisors. We did use cooling towels, and we use coolers with ice water in them. And that's something I'd created. Let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, so then when they suggested that we were able to repurpose commercial thermostats to collect that stuff, I worked with a guy in the corporate office, and we created this. So this gave us instantaneous calculated index. And what we were able to do then is get this broadcasted throughout the plant so that each area knew where they were. And so yellow was just a caution, not a big deal. Orange was, okay, make sure you guys are drinking water, look out for each other. Red is, we're going to give you the option to go home, or you guys need to be taking more breaks. And so in both in English and Spanish, this was the code that went out for everybody. And that's really what we use, and they're still using it now. Last summer, I was there, for 2 days, and I was kind of monitoring. So this is the information we get now. Or I should say they get. I keep saying like I'm there. What's funny is just the other day, last night actually, one of the recruiter people just reached out to me. She's like, "Oh, I remember we were talking about this, and I found this article and made me think of you. How are you doing?" I really enjoyed working with these people at this company. I got to try so much stuff. So here I've got the weather related stuff, and I'm monitoring how things are going on, and the conditions that would lead to something like this, I would check that out. And if that was something to be expected, I'd see what I could do to try and mitigate that, whether it's closing certain windows, closing certain doors, putting fans in certain places. That's what I was trying to do overnight. And by doing so, if we didn't have to shut things down, I was keeping production going. And so that's what I was really focusing on. And yeah, so I had so many models running when we could expect stuff that my boss could text me in the middle of the night, and I could quick do the calculation and send it to her and be like, okay, by 10:30 things are going to get a little bit rough. She's like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, rent this piece of equipment, or I'm going to bring in popsicles or ice things, and then we'll see what we can do. I'm like, cool. And we did some really cool stuff, protecting people. The workers really liked it too, because we were paying attention to them and we were trying to protect them. And one day, we reached the point that management had agreed to. Nobody was on site. They're all off something else. Somehow I was the person who is in top command, and I made the call, and I sent people home. And I got yelled at, and I thought I was going to get fired. But 4 hours later, when the plant got really bad, the VP thanked me for making that call. I mean, they probably, shutting down manufacturing like that, probably, it cost them money, but they realized after a bunch of news stories came out that different companies had workers go down with heat stroke and things like that, you know what, he made the right call. And it actually made the union happy, which made management much more happy. But, it was one of those things. This was one of my biggest concerns was that somebody would succumb to a heat-related illness under my watch. And so I dedicated a lot of time and effort to protect the workers, and they knew it. And that's probably what was the most important thing. So that is, I believe that's everything I wanted to show you guys with heat stress. That standard isn't put in place yet. I'm still working on writing a paper on everything we learned from our process. But in speaking to the person who replaced me, I think I talked to him last time, it was like 4 weeks ago. They're still practicing on everything that I have here. And they're doing a great job. And they're protecting people. And they're learning things too. But it's a little bit of trial and error, and you figure it out. So sorry this went a little bit long, but we had a lot of different topics to cover, and I think this is really important.